What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, starring Jeremy Allen White as well as Jeremy Strong, and it's coming our way on October 24th, so not to worry, I won't give anything away in this video. But I saw it yesterday at the New York Film Festival, and I wanted to go ahead and do my review while the movie's still fresh in my mind, as opposed to letting those memories kind of fade away over the next few weeks. And my immediate first impression is that as far as musical biopics go, Deliver Me From Nowhere is very solid, very enjoyable, and features some great performances by Jeremy Allen White, as well as Jeremy Strong, who plays John Landau, Springsteen's manager and record producer. But for those of you out there who are not complete and total Bruce Springsteen fanatics, here's the official premise as written over on Wikipedia. The film chronicles the making of Bruce Springsteen's 1982 Nebraska album when he was a young musician on the cusp of global superstardom, struggling to reconcile the pressures of success with the ghosts of his past. Recorded on a 4-track recorder in Springsteen's New Jersey bedroom, the album marked a pivotal time in his life and is considered one of his most enduring works, a stark, somber acoustic recording portraying the lives of blue-collar workers who try to succeed in life but fail at every turn while searching for a deliverance that never comes. And that description more or less gets the job done, and I don't think people will have any trouble getting on board with Jeremy Allen White's portrayal of the boss himself as not necessarily a tortured artist, but a brooding artist who's concerned with, as he becomes more successful and as he becomes more popular and as he gets pressed or kind of gets pressured into creating top 10 hits, singles, going on tour, will he lose touch with his roots? Will he lose touch with the people and the environment that helped shape him into the musician that he became? And it is interesting following the story of an artist when he's getting all this pressure to basically step down on the gas pedal and just like take that rocket ship ride to superstardom, and instead he decides, you know what, I'm going to tap the brakes, I'm going to slow things down, and I want to create something very raw and very emotional and very personal and very honest without the kind of like the trappings of like a big studio album. So if you're a fan of Bruce or you're a fan of Nebraska, I imagine you probably already have your tickets to see this movie on October 24th. But I wouldn't place it quite on the level of a movie like A Complete Unknown starring Timothy Chalamet as Bob Dylan, which came out last year. But admittedly, I am a Bob Dylan super fan, just total psychotic lunatic, whereas with Bruce Springsteen, I'm much more of a casual. I've seen him in concert thanks to my friend Rob Cotto. And speaking of Rob Cotto, he was the producer on the documentary Stevie Van Zandt Disciple, directed by the legendary Bill Tech, which came out last year. And I consider myself lucky that I can call both of these fellows friends. And when I was on my way to the press screening for Deliver Me From Nowhere, I reached out to them by text and I said, what have you heard? What is the inside scoop for those people who are either totally obsessed with Bruce Springsteen or have been lucky enough to work with him, as well as his fellow musicians like Stevie Van Zandt? And this is what Bill Tech had to say. Key thing being, James, After the River, which was a big commercial hit and yielded Bruce's first top 10 hit, Hungry Heart, plus his incessant touring over the 8 years leading up to it, had prepared him for rock and roll's superstardom. And then instead of embracing that, he made this dark, scary folk album of serial killers and lonely haunted people. He didn't even re-record the album professionally. He mastered and released the cassette he'd been carrying around in his pocket that he lost the case for. After getting Nebraska out of his system, he began lifting weights seriously, got over his depression, and released Born in the USA, which sold over 7 million copies and was tied with Thriller for most top 10 hits. And as somebody who was alive at the time and watching a lot of MTV, that era was my first exposure to Bruce Springsteen. And suddenly, music videos for songs like Glory Days were all over the place, or the music video for Dancing in the Dark, directed by Brian De Palma, one of my all-time favorite filmmakers, that was everywhere. Or Bruce popping in to sing a few lyrics for We Are the World. Suddenly he was everywhere. You would be watching romantic comedies or teen dramas or high school movies, and there would be a poster for Bruce in the background. Suddenly, everywhere you looked, Bruce was a huge part of the culture. And yet, I never considered myself a huge fanatic, because in the 1980s, I very quickly went from liking a lot of MTV and a lot of pop music to being obsessed with like British invasion music from the 1960s. And I have no idea why that's the case, but suddenly around age 10, I just wanted to listen to The Who and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and all those bands. I don't know what made me I undergo that switch, but it just happened. So I'm not going to try and persuade anybody that throughout the 1980s that I was religiously listening to all of Bruce's albums. And actually, when it came to the album Nebraska, the only time I ever listened to the album, I listened to it 2 or 3 times on the subway ride to the screening and while I was standing in line for the screening to start. So if you prefer to wait for a video from somebody who is a self-proclaimed Bruce Springsteen fanatic, I totally get it. But if you want a more kind of calm, objective perspective from somebody from the outside looking in, here are the strengths and weaknesses of the movie as I see them. So my most lingering impression of the movie is that the cast does a better job than writer-director Scott Cooper. And I don't want to come across as unnecessarily harsh or unnecessarily critical, but I'm just not a big fan of Scott Cooper's movies. Admittedly, I've not seen all of them. I've seen Antlers, I've seen Black Mass, I've seen Crazy Heart. But I'm just not completely, totally blown away by Scott Cooper the same way I am like Milos Forman, who created my all-time favorite musical biopic, Amadeus.
Better? What do you think?
Amadeus is one of those movies that is the standard by which I judge any other musical biopic, whether they're talking about jazz musicians, classical composers, or rock stars, or whatever the case might be. I think I've seen Amadeus probably 25 or 30 times, and I imagine I'll see it 25 or 30 more times between now and when I meet my maker. But I just absolutely fucking love and adore Amadeus, and it's got all the kind of like the brilliant intensity that you hope for from a musical biopic about a musician that you respect. But there's no denying the fact that Jeremy Allen White was totally game for this role and totally prepared for this role, and apparently spent a ton of time preparing to sing in a style that is more or less reminiscent of Bruce. Obviously, there's only one Bruce, but I think Jeremy Allen White did a pretty goddamn good job. And I very quickly stopped thinking of him as the star of The Bear or The Iron Claw, or even as the model for all those outrageous underwear ads that came out a year or so ago. But I must admit, if I looked even half as good as Jeremy Allen White with his shirt off, I'd be posing for underwear ads day and night. And who knows, I might even turn this YouTube channel into nothing but underwear ads. But at age 49, I think the window is closed to my alternative career as an underwear model. But I think what's missing from this movie is a little bit of dramatic tension. And writer-director Scott Cooper, he tries really hard to bring in different elements of Bruce Springsteen's biography in order to create that tension, like his unresolved feelings towards his father, played by actor Stephen Graham, because his father was a bit of a drunk and a bit abusive, and Bruce is still suffering from a lot of depression related to those feelings towards his father, which the movie tries to explore. And I would say that Stephen Graham is just fine in this, but those scenes with his father, even though they should be the most dramatically compelling in the movie, they're not half as interesting as those scenes between Bruce Springsteen and his manager, John Landau, played by Jeremy Strong.
The only thing I can still believe in.
Then we'll get it. Whatever it takes.
And it helps that Jeremy Strong is absolutely in his prime as an actor right now, where every single movie or show that he appears in, no matter how good or bad the movie might be, he is always fantastic. And those scenes when they're hanging out in a diner and just trying to figure out, like, how do we capture, like, the essence of Nebraska that as it stands on the tape, how do we recreate that in the studio if it's even possible? Those scenes are fantastic. And also the scenes between John Landau and Al Teller, where he's basically explaining how Bruce Springsteen doesn't want his face on the cover of the album. He doesn't want to do a tour promoting the album. He doesn't want to have any hit singles. He just wants to put Nebraska out there and see what happens. And those scenes provide an interesting inside look into the music biz. And while it might come across like too much inside baseball for some people, for me, the most interesting scenes in the movie are those where we see all these engineers trying to figure out, like, how do we overcome the technical challenge of taking a cassette that was recorded at home that has a little bit of distortion, a little bit of crackle on it. How do we get that prepared for, like, the mass market while preserving the flavor of the cassette, but removing some of the technical shortcomings by virtue of the fact that Bruce was just at home alone recording these tracks with the help of Paul Walter Hauser, who plays Mike Batlin. And Paul Walter Hauser, I feel like he's in basically every single show or movie being made these days, but he's pretty goddamn fun. I mean, if you like him in anything, you'll like him in this. Odessa Young is good in this as the love interest. She's very easy on the eye. She's very pretty. I don't know how much that story really adds to the movie, apart from those scenes that are in the Stone Pony. And as anybody knows who's familiar with the background of Bruce Springsteen, all those performances as the Stone Pony are a huge part of his early days. And I think the movie does a pretty good job of recreating that era. And let me have a look at some of the rest of the cast. Gabby Hoffman's pretty good as Bruce's mother, and she brings a lot of heart and warmth to the role. Maybe the only boring or uninteresting dramatic performance in here is by comedian Mark Maron, where it just seems like he's so happy to be in a movie about Bruce Springsteen, he kind of forgot to do anything. He's basically just kind of frozen with this stupid grin on his face, and all the scenes where he appears, I'm like, can't you give us like something like you know, a thoughtful expression or anything like that? But I think Mark Maron, I think he's just a huge Bruce fan, that he was just thrilled to be included in the project. But there are some scenes in this movie that I would regrettably describe as a little extra fat on the bone, which kind of pads the runtime and stretches it out and gives it a little less forward momentum. And case in point, as far as those scenes are concerned, are the scenes where we see John Landau go home and discussing all of his ongoing business issues and creative issues with Bruce with his wife, Barbara Landau, played by Grace Gummer. And every single one of those scenes, I was like, why are we watching Bruce's manager discussing the trials and tribulations of Bruce when we're much more interested in Bruce. And admittedly, the scenes between Bruce and John are fantastic. They're the most riveting in the movie, but I don't need to see John Landau's home life. They add nothing new to the movie that's not already being explored very thoroughly by the scenes between Bruce and John when they're hanging out at the diner, or hanging out at the recording studio, or whatever the case might be. And so I'm just wondering, why are these scenes in here? Because, once again, this is a movie about Bruce Springsteen. It's not the John Landau story. And so the movie definitely has its flaws. And I think it all just boils down to the fact that I'm just not that blown away by Scott Cooper as a filmmaker, even though I've seen several of his movies. I would be curious to read the book, though. The book, Deliver Me From Nowhere by Warren Zanes, apparently is just absolutely fascinating, or at least for people who are diehard Bruce Springsteen fans. And I imagine that for Scott Cooper, he had a Herculean challenge in front of him where he's thinking, what from the book do we keep and what do we let slide? Because once again, you've only got a 2-hour runtime. You can only cram but so much into the movie. But the big question is, how warmly will this movie be received by the Bruce Springsteen fanatics out there, and how warmly will it be received by the Jeremy Allen White fans out there? Because obviously The Bear is a huge show, and it's won all these Golden Globes and all these Emmys, and people fucking love The Bear. They're obsessed with The Bear, and so I imagine some of them, just out of curiosity, will want to see what Jeremy Allen White is up to as the boss. But the much bigger fan base, obviously, are those fans of Bruce Springsteen. And he apparently showed up to perform a song on Sunday night after the first screening of the movie. He sadly did not show up for the Monday morning press screening that I attended. But when I went to a Bruce Springsteen concert about a year and a half ago at Madison Square Garden, the crowd was losing their goddamn minds. And admittedly, they've got a little age on them because a lot of them have been fans since like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but they were fucking drunk and screaming and singing. And at different points in the show, like the band would kind of come out into the crowd and they would just, they would all kind of rush forward screaming. It was insane. And so it's always interesting when you're not a fanatic for a particular musician or for a particular band, when you get exposed to that fanaticism that is very real and very genuine and very hard-earned over many, many decades. But as we've seen in recent years, some musical biopics take off like a rocket and some just kind of fade away, like Bohemian Rhapsody, I think made like $900 million. There was Elvis, which did really well. And it's always interesting seeing which musical biopics choose to tackle the entire life of the artist versus a specific chapter. I prefer the movies that tackle a specific chapter, like Deliver Me From Nowhere. It's 1982, and it's like, do you want to go big or do you want to go small with your next career step? Like, do you want to take an unconventional career step, take a risk that might withstand the test of time, or do you just want to do all the things that you're supposed to do? That, for me, is interesting. But Elvis with Austin Butler obviously tackled his entire life. Bohemian Rhapsody covered more or less his entire life. I can't remember with Rocket Man what they did. Does Rocket Man cover the entire life of Elton John? But I enjoyed Rocket Man to a degree. I think Deliver Me From Nowhere is stronger than Rocket Man. It's stronger than Bohemian Rhapsody. Probably stronger than Elvis. I liked Elvis in terms of what Austin Butler brought to the table, and I liked the second half of the movie. I thought the first half of Elvis was absolutely dreadful, where the director made the idiotic decision of including 21st century music as opposed to the music from the 50s that Elvis was responding to as he got his own career started. I just thought that was a disastrous creative decision. So Deliver Me From Nowhere is on the stronger end of the spectrum of musical biopics, not quite on the level of A Complete Unknown, and definitely a far cry from Amadeus, my all-time favorite musical biopic. But I should probably do a list at some point. What are my top 10 favorite musical biopics ever made? And I don't mean documentaries about musicians or concerts about musicians. Like, what are the great films that explore the life of a musician? But Amadeus is one that I always come back to, and I fall in love with it all over again each time I revisit it. There's some good ones out there, like Clint Eastwood did one about Charlie Parker called Bird back in 1988. Obviously, there's Walk the Line about Johnny Cash. There's Coal Miner's Daughter, which is really good, from 1980s. So to be continued when it comes to musical biopics. But I think that's about all I've got to say about Deliver Me From Nowhere. I would recommend, if you're unfamiliar with Bruce's music, I would recommend you follow the exact same advice that I received from Bill Tech and Rob Cotto, where start with the album The River, which is the album that he's promoting at the beginning of the movie. He's finishing up his tour promoting that album before he's going to take a little break and just go off and have this kind of sad, melancholy journey recording Nebraska all by himself. But definitely listen to Nebraska a few times. It's a really good album, especially if you enjoy music where somebody's just sitting there by themselves, just kind of exploring all sorts of pain and heartache. And as a movie lover, it was interesting seeing how Bruce Springsteen, at least in the context of the movie, I don't know to what extent this is real, but he takes a lot of inspiration from the Terrence Malick movie Badlands. And Badlands, one of those movies that I've seen, I don't know how many times, but I think it's one of the best debuts by a filmmaker ever. But yeah, Badlands, if you love movies from the 1970s, Badlands absolutely is essential viewing. But it's featured very prominently in this movie. I was like, all right, fuck yeah. Any filmmaker who is a fan of Badlands, like, I can't be but so critical of your work. And there are also a lot of nods to the movie The Night of the Hunter, which is yet another classic from the 1950s that I love. Speaking of filmmaking debuts, Charles Laughton, he made his filmmaking debut and retired as a director with Night of the Hunter. Obviously, he'd been an incredible actor for many, many years, but the one time he decided to direct a movie, he just made this true, just like black and white, like gothic horror movie or gothic children's adventure movie, however you want to describe it. So if you're a fan of Night of the Hunter and or Badlands, and if you've not seen either or both, I strongly recommend you watch both many times over. I think you'll be pleased by how many nods both those movies receive over the course of the runtime of Deliver Me From Nowhere. In any case, I think I've said all I need to say about Deliver Me From Nowhere. A very enjoyable movie, but not quite like a Hall of Fame exceptional movie, but that's totally fine. We don't need to throw stones at movies for failing to be like Hall of Fame classics. Sometimes a movie can just be an interesting ride through an artist's life, and that's enough. And if it encourages more people to check out the 1982 album Nebraska, well then I guess mission accomplished as far as this movie is concerned. But let me know what you think down in the comments below, especially if you are a Bruce fanatic versus somebody who's more of like a Bruce casual like I am. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.